Taking your time to be with us today. I'd like to bring this meeting of the PSTA Board of Directors to order, please. It's March 27th, 2019, and I would like to respectfully ask that Commissioner Cox lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's so hard to move this. So, as we begin our meeting today, I'd like to ask that anyone in the audience, if you would like to speak during our public comment section of the agenda, please come up and sign one of the green cards so that we can make sure that you are recognized. And with that said, is there anyone here now that wants to speak now before we get into the regular agenda? All right, then I do have Chase Hollowell. Would you like to come forward, please? State your name and give your address for the clerk, please.
My name is Chase Hollowell. I'm a resident of Seminole. My address is 12290 91st Avenue North, and the zip code is 33772.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
You have 3 minutes to state your...
Great. I'm really glad to see most of the board members here today. I'm a resident of Seminole. I've been writing PSTA for 30 years. I'm also a student at St. Pete College, Seminole, pursuing a degree in psychology. I'm a sophomore right now. I'm also a worker. I work at a company, you've probably heard of Midway Services, which is over off of 118th. I work for a company upstairs called Think Utility Services. I've worked at 4 companies on 118th Avenue over many years. This is the first time I've ever been able to take the 58 because of the way the scheduling has been done. I was actually able to work this out with my employer and sat down with him, which I don't want to keep filming. Okay, this is the schedule that I had. Very same one that I used when I talked to him. So he wanted me to work until 5. So it didn't really work out. So he was nice enough to let me work 7:15 to 5:15, for 4:15, I'm sorry. The bus comes around 4:30. Now, if I miss that bus going home, there's a gap of about an hour and a half. Now, that gap is consistent going all the way up and down the corridor when people typically get out of work. There's a scheduling problem. So I asked myself, why? And what I found when I asked for the data, which I was very pleasantly surprised that Rachel Capella was so nice. And I was thinking I was going to have to pay for it because it says that on your website. 99 cents for a CD, but gosh knows how much research will have to be done. Well, I got the questions for the survey. And I've taken statistics. And I'm sure most of you probably are familiar with sample data and how critical it is when you go to evaluate scheduling or any other statistic that you're going to use to measure for that matter. So the problem is this. There's a question on that survey. It says, what time do you take this route? The answers that were gathered in 2017 were the answers, morning, afternoon, or evening. Now, if anybody does not see where the problem is there, to elaborate, you need to get a time. Because how can you schedule a route without knowing what times people are riding it? Now, if you look in the left-hand column, which I'm sure somebody would point out, when they took the survey from the people, they actually had a time there. But the problem with that is you don't know if that's the normal time they're going to ride the bus. You don't know if they do it every day. You can't even draw a conclusion from that. So there's a flaw in the data. Scheduling is going to be an issue. I don't know just if it's just this route or others. And I think it's something that needs to be looked at. So what I'm curious about is, has anybody ever reached out to the companies and on 118th and said, hey, what are your working hours? Well, the thing is I don't think anybody has. And if they had, I'd like to see that data. The other problem is, I know you can't appease everybody, but you need to establish a baseline on when people are going to ride the bus. The other problem, and I've talked to people about this, is all of the jobs that are available on that corridor. People do not actually apply for them because of the scheduling discrepancies. So how many people have lost the opportunity to work on that? Those are people that would pay to ride the bus. So then you start looking at it being the 5th lowest revenue producing route. Yeah, I can see why you'd want to close it. But did anybody take into account how it was scheduled? Did anybody decide to put any emphasis on marketing? Marketing has been slashed drastically over the past 4 or 5 years. You're operating on a miscellaneous budget, which I've come to find out is around $480,000 that was in the budget proposal that had been approved for 2019. So if that's the case, look at where it was. It was over $2 million about 5 years ago. There's a $1.7 million deficit that needs to be made up just in route revenue alone.
Mr. Hollowell, would you wrap up your comment?
Yes, so what I'm getting at is the money that was slashed from marketing to be able to get more people to ride the bus is proportional to the amount that people are basically, you're losing revenue. And also there's no call to action on your marketing. Marketing has no return on investment listed on the actual budget. Something critical in a normal corporation. It's knowing how much you're paying for your advertising, how many people did you reach. And now I know they got 3 awards, but those are basically awards within the transit industry. If you're in corporate America, your marketing budget for a normal corporation is 9 to 12%. For a starting company, it's 2 to 3%.
Thank you, Mr. Hollowell,
So
for your
thank you for
comments.
letting me share. I have a lot more if anybody's interested.
Thank you very much. Please come and share your thoughts with us whenever you would like. That's what we need in order to make our decisions.
Like to find solutions.
We're working very hard to do that, so.
I know.
thank
I'd
you.
like to see data on that.
All right, thank you.
you.
Cassandra Borgers is right behind you, and I think she probably has some conversation she'd like to have. Robin Shaw, I think it's Shaw, I may get that wrong. Are you here, Robin? Please come forward and state your name and address for the clerk. Good morning.
Again,
Good morning.
my name's Robin Shaw. I live at 10970 Oakdale Terrace in Seminole. I've seen a lot of you before. Thank you for being here and taking the time to be with me. I know that the 58 is slated to be canceled. That is what I've heard, and I'm still fighting for that and trying to get the companies aware so that they can understand that their ad valorem taxes are paying for a route that's servicing them to get people like me that work hard for them every day and would like to work for the next 22 years there. With the help of the PSTA, because I cannot drive with my disability. I have Tourette's and spondylosis where I cannot tell sometimes when I'm walking. And anyway, I do have more signatures that I was able to garner. And like I said, I've been handing out information to different corporations along the line. I have noticed also that there is a free bus ride now going for the baseball, and I don't see how we keep doing these free rides like the Looper and this baseball things, and I understand it's great for advertising and getting the name out and good word out for, you know, the bus riding and get them out there to ride it actually, but to do that when you're slating to cut my livelihood and my ride home in a community that I pay, I'm not just a tourist, I'm here every day like you. And I do care about the folks, the bus family that I talk to and get to meet every day. I do have, Raytheon is hiring, and there is 2 new riders that do ride our bus. And I am trying to encourage other people because I save a lot of money on insurance and car payments going on this route that I could not afford otherwise. I pay for my grandchildren, you know, to do the things that they need to do. And I'm sure that a lot of my other coworkers do the same. And I just want to stay working and valid in this community more than just a tourist. And I wish that I could give you these numbers and also the numbers from Raytheon itself and the UAW, because we've been here at the Star Center with the community at the county Star Center there for, I don't know, 10 years, maybe longer. And we would like to encourage more because the cafeteria staff comes in on the bus. You know, we've got to know them as bus family, as a community. You guys are my family. And I know what you do is very important, but giving free bus rides, like the 59 runs every 15 minutes. I've ridden the 59. A lot of times it's empty going down the Elmerton Road. And that's, okay, a cut, like ours is cutting through, but ours is through an industrial area that is growing. And I'm meeting more people and encouraging them to stay on this bus route, but a lot of them right now are spazzing and trying to find other routes to work and getting in trouble at work because I was late trying to go the other route. I did try. I also was, you know, taking a lot of days off trying to save this route because it is desperately needed by me and my bus family, my community, all of you. You got to understand, we want to do the best job we can. We need your help.
Thank you,
The
Ms.
communities down in the Tierra Verde and all them, if they pay their ad valorem taxes, please fight for that. Maybe that will save my route. The 59 runs every 15 minutes. The 18 doesn't even run every 15 minutes. It's every 20 minutes. And it's packed where the 59 is not. Maybe if we could change that route service just a little bit more to 20 minutes or 30 minutes, depending, we might be able to save my route. Maybe the 22.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. If you have petitions that you would like to share with the board, please give them to the clerk, and she'll be happy to share them with us. Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak with regard to these routes today? Seeing none, then we are going to move on to our first presentation, which is the APTA Legislative Conference. Whitney, I understand that you have a short video that you would like to share with us of your trip.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Long, Mr. Miller, and board members. As Chairwoman Long said, we just returned from the American Public Transportation Association Legislative Conference in Washington, D.C. The conference is scheduled years in advance, so unfortunately, Congress was not in session while we were there. However, we did get the opportunity to meet with our congressional delegation, Congressman Gus Bilirakis' staff, and the staff of Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Rick Scott, to thank them for their continued support for public transportation and, of course, to ask them to continue to support public transportation. We also had a very important meeting with the Federal Transit Administration at the United States Department of Transportation to discuss federal funding for our Central Avenue rapid transit system. But as you'll see in the video, one of the most exciting parts of the trip was PSTA actually being asked to present as one of the most innovative transit systems for partnering with Uber on our Direct Connect and TD Late Shift programs. So Brad and our senior planner, Bonnie Epstein, presented to the entire conference and all of the transit systems in the country, just to talk about our innovative ways and things that we're doing here in Pinellas County. So this was actually my first APTA legislative conference since I've been working here at PSTA, and I have to say, personally, it was very exciting to see so many people in the industry talking about PSTA with such high regard. I was actually in the front row while Bonnie and Brad were presenting, kind of like a proud soccer mom taking video. And I felt very proud to say that I was with PSTA while I was at this conference. So I just wanted to put that out there. But here's the quick video that we put together for you.
direct connect, like you were the first, and by the way, your reputation, I think, as a transit agency for being creative with these partnerships, so kudos for that. But now as we can talk about TV late.
for Pinellas and Creative Pinellas Group, representing the art community in Pinellas County. And the work is moving along. In fact, there was a meeting last night. I didn't get a chance to go to it, but it was kind of an unveiling of where we are in that process. One of the main things that they've talked about, a lot of the feedback we got was a need for they call it maker space along the corridor, which is really another way of saying incubator space. So there's a real need along the Alt-19 corridor for more of that. But I think the PSTA's has been an integral part of connecting the North County anyway. And from a cultural standpoint, all those communities seem to work hand in hand. And I think our Jolly Trolley has really made that connection even better. So anyway, more conversation on the Cultural Corridor project coming. We had an update on the Advantage Pinellas plan, which it's really our first plan, the long-range plan that's going to combine transportation with our land use plan and also with PSTA's and their transit component. So where we are now is we've kind of gotten to a point where our population forecast in that 2045 is going to be in that 90 to 95,000. We'd like to say, we've been saying that it's like adding another Largo to the county. Mayor, former mayor. Yeah, really. So, and employment forecasted to increase by about 60,000 in that time frame. So what we're trying to do now is pull together that needs assessment that kind of matches the two. Where people are going to be working, where they're going to be living, and how do we get them back and forth. So a focus group continues to meet to give some feedback on that potential corridors that we need to work on for transit. We talked a little bit about some drainage and safety problems on the Gulf Boulevard in Indian Shores, and Executive Director has sent a letter to our legislative delegation talking about the issues that we're focusing on as an entity. Let's see, I guess finally I would just say that we've kind of started focusing more and more on the safety components that our FDOT Secretary has made a focus of his efforts, and so that continues to come up in every conversation that we have. There was a little discussion about the 7 jurisdictions that aren't currently paying PSTA funding, and talking about the county commissioner. County commission might have an authorization component to that. And that's really about it. I guess the last thing I would say is that Whit and Barry Burton, our county administrator, and with Blanton continue to meet and discuss ways that we can work together, whether from a planning perspective or even some short-term gap funding for some revenue. So anyway, that's it. A lot going on, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Any questions of Commissioner Egger's report? Anyone? No?
Thank you,
Thank
Madam
you
Chair.
so much,
Yep.
Commissioner. And while T-BARTA is not on our agenda this morning for an update, I do want to share that the first iteration that came out of the Appropriations Committee in Tallahassee last week had us at $4-point-something million for T-BARTA. And so while we know that that's a very ambitious number and much more than we actually had requested, we know it's not going to hold as the legislature gets into conference a few weeks from now. So stay tuned, because at least it shows that we're on a very positive trajectory as far as the legislative support for our initiatives. And now I would like to take up the consent agenda and ask if any board member has anything they would like to withdraw from the consent agenda. If anyone has anything they want. Second. Well, okay then, moving right along. Please open the voting card. Terrific.
Yeah, you'd think I would learn this by now to join before the meeting starts.
I can do it for you, yes.
Thank you.
All right, that approved, consent agenda is approved unanimously. And Ms. Debbie Laos is our first action item and would like to talk to us about our audit. Please come forward.
Well, thank you so much. This morning, it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Laughlin, who is our principal at Clifton Larson Allen, who has worked on our audit. He's going to be presenting the results of this audit, and I'm pleased to say it's an unmodified opinion, which means that our financial statements are perfectly wonderful. In addition, he is going to be making some, listing out some findings and recommendations for us so that we can have some improvements going forward. One of the things that I do with each year we have an audit is that I have Clifton Larson Allen take a look, and I think you could call it a element of unpredictability. That means it's a surprise to them as it is to me sometimes. But what I do is I have them take a look at things that are very important to PSTA. In the past, we've taken a look at procurement cards and the processes and making sure everything is good, telecommunications, where we've been able to save a lot of money, health insurance, and this year it was on DART, because DART is one of our most significant expenditures that we have. So all of this is included in their annual fee at no extra cost, and we really appreciate it because it helps to make us a better organization. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to do his presentation.
Good morning, Andrew. Please state your name and address of your firm for the clerk.
Andrew Laughlin, principal with Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA. I'm also joined with my colleague, Lance Schmidt, also a principal with CLA, and help leads our Florida local government practice. I'll give him a little longer introduction in just a bit. But appreciate that introduction from Debbie. Thank you so much. Chairman Long, great to see you. Great to see everybody on the board. Just have a quick 5 to 10 minute presentation with a few slides to cover what Debbie mentioned, some of what we found in presenting the audit results. Any questions you all have at any moment, please feel free to raise them. So here's just the quick agenda. We'll talk about the engagement team members, the reports that we rendered that are included in the CAFR document, talk a little bit about internal controls, any findings that we encountered, that element of unpredictability that Debbie described so eloquently, a little quick financial statement overview, and then talk a little bit and bringing Lance in here on some future transition plans. So the engagement team, our core engagement team is really consistent as in prior years. I had overall engagement responsibility for us. So I was the guy responsible for making sure the job got done right, got done timely. We had a financial statement team and a single audit team. We had Sue Pagan, director, and she's been on this engagement since its inception, and so she provided the detailed review of all that work that was performed at the manager level. We had the one who was really in the trenches running the engagement, that was Kim Pobletti, and then behind her, Joe Baltera. They lead our Florida local government practice in the Tampa Bay area and serve all of our local government clients in this area, PSTA being one of them. So they had a lot of knowledge from other engagements, as well as been working on PSTA for a while as well. So great to have them on board working on this audit again. We had our IT auditor, Jim Barton, who provided an assessment of general computer controls and application controls as it relates to PSTA's IT infrastructure, and did some audit procedures there and assessing controls in the IT space. And then we also have an NTD, agreed upon procedures team, that will be consisting of myself and Joe Baltera. That's some additional agreed upon procedures engagement that we need to perform. There's actually 2 this year that are required, and we'll be performing and hopefully completing those in April, which is consistent with prior years. We complete the financial statement audit, and then we do the agreed upon procedures work. Question?
Yeah, Andrew, would you just for the record explain NTD and AUP?
Sure. So NTD is the National Transit Database. So this is the reporting mechanism. This is a required reporting to the national NTD for all kinds of statistical information about operating cost information, passenger miles traveled, vehicle revenue hours, all kinds of different information that gets accumulated and presented by transit agencies across the country. And so if a certain transit agency has over, I believe, 100, it's either 100 or 200 revenue vehicles in operation, then an agreed upon procedures engagement is necessary to contract with an auditing firm like ours to actually validate the steps that are being performed and reporting that information. So that's an engagement that we do on an annual basis. And so that's been consistent with prior years.
Good, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the report's being delivered. So just to give you a status on the audit is complete. So we have finished everything. I've signed off, or my concur partner reviewer has signed off, so the CAFR, what I call the Comprehensive Annual Report, or CAFR document that's ready for final issuance. So these are the reports that were included into the CAFR. We had our independent auditors report, where, as Debbie mentioned, we have an unmodified opinion, which means all the information is fairly presented within all material respects. We have an internal control report that we rendered, that is in case we had any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control. We would report them in this report. We had none to report. We have a single audit report. So we do single audit testing on major federal programs and state projects. If there were any compliance issues, whether question costs, instances of noncompliance, or internal controls that we have to test over compliance, if we found any deficiencies in internal control, we would report them in that single audit report. We did have a few matters that we did encounter and included in our schedule of findings of question costs, which is included with our single audit report. I have a synopsis of that in the next few slides. The management letter, this would be any maybe recommendations to improve financial management or deficiencies in internal control that didn't rise to the significance of those that would be reported in the internal control report. We had one matter that we felt was a recommendation to improve financial management that we included in the management letter. I'll get to that in a moment. Examination report, that's over investment compliance. So did PSTA comply with its investment policy and how it invests its cash equivalents, and investments? We found no exceptions there, so that was an unmodified opinion on investment compliance. And then our governance communication, this is a required letter by auditing standards that we issue every year. It states if there are any major significant accounting policies, any disagreements that we had with management, any corrected or uncorrected misstatements. So we had no disagreements, no corrected or uncorrected misstatements. We did have a new significant accounting principle that was adopted for this year. We'll go through that in an upcoming slide on financial statement overview. So the single audit testing, I did mention there was a single audit performed. So we had one major federal program, 3 state projects that we tested. This can fluctuate, vary each year depending on a number of factors, mainly how much the authority spends each year on these these federal programs and state projects, and also the frequency historically for which we select these programs and projects as major to test. And so this year, typically it ranges 2 to 3, sometimes 4, and this was the year where we did have 4 to test. So internal control analysis just had 4 what we call findings or comments that we rendered in our reports this year, 3 in the single audit report, 1 in the management letter. The first one here was just on the purchase of tires. There was sales tax that was included by the vendor, Michelin. That got missed in review. So that sales tax, which obviously PSTA is sales tax exempt, but it did remit payment to the vendor, Michelin, for the purchase of tires that included sales tax, and then that was also a grant reimbursable item. So then the sales tax was also reimbursed by the federal agency. So our recommendation was to whatever the sales tax that was remitted to Michelin, get reimbursed for that, also reimburse the grantor agency, and then just have some heightened scrutiny around inspecting those vendor invoices to make sure that sales taxes are not on there, since this is a tax-exempt organization. Number 2 is the EPLS verification. That's the excluded parties list system. So anytime is required under federal law, anytime a vendor procures with PSTA, which is a non-federal entity and will be reimbursed with grant dollars, PSTA is required to verify that that entity is not a suspended or debarred or otherwise excluded party. And there's a sam.gov, you can do a SAM search, which is the System for Awards Management. It's a pretty easy, quick search. PSTA is fully aware of this compliance requirement. They comply with it 99.9%. This was one that just got missed with one particular procurement with a vendor that we caught in our testing. In fact, internally, PSTA did identify it and did the SAM search subsequent to procuring with that vendor, but obviously the timing is you should be doing that SAM search before you engage that vendor in any kind of transaction in which they'll be reimbursed with federal grant dollars. So that's necessitated that comment there. The next one's on verification of eligibility requirements. So under the TD program, Transportation Disadvantage Program, there are eligibility requirements that must be met. Some is like, for example, showing proof of income, that you meet the income threshold, among others. So eligibility documentation should be retained for each individual that is eligible in the program. So we made a selection of individuals. I believe it was approximately 8 out of 40. There was not sufficient eligibility documentation that was able to be remitted to us to prove that they were indeed eligible. So our recommendation here is just develop the necessary protocols in place, both internally within PSTA, where PSTA processes these applications for these individuals, as well as other supporting agencies that might do that. They also need to be remitting that eligibility documentation to PSTA so they can maintain that on file. So when the auditors come in, whether it's us or whether it's the State of Florida Commission for Transportation Disadvantage, and do an audit, that documentation is readily available to be remitted to the auditor. So those were the three comments we had relating to single audit. We had one in the management letter. This just relates to time card approvals. This just is in the event when processing payroll, there are times in which an employee's time may not be approved by a supervisor in time for payroll to be processed. So the supervisor can be out for an extended period on vacation, or there may not be a backup in place to perform that review in advance. So this can happen. We understand this is a large organization with hundreds of employees. So our recommendation here, because we found some employees through our selections and testing that didn't have any approvals at all until after we made the audit inquiry. So we suggest just after a payroll is processed that the PSTA go through a process to see, okay, who did not have those time cards approved, and let's get that approval from those departmental supervisors after the fact and maintain documentation of that. A couple other verbal recommendations. One, use of positive pay. We've mentioned this in the past, PSTA is working to try to institute positive pay in its processes, working with the bank, just some administrative processes to go through in order to get that done. And then the second one is the oversight of ambulatory versus wheelchair trips in the DART program. That speaks to the element of unpredictability that I'll be discussing next. So I'll hold that for this next section here. So Debbie mentioned that we try to do some things to mix up the audit each year. DART program was one that Debbie wanted us to specifically look at. So we did a number of different tests using data analysis software. So we got a vendor or a master file of all the individuals that are eligible or listed in the DART program that's maintained internally by PSTA. And the DART program is operated by a third-party provider, which is CareRide, and they provide a listing of trips, and that accompanies their invoice that PSTA pays CareRide for those ambulatory and wheelchair trips. So we did some analysis comparing those files and doing all sorts of different tests, 4 in total. So one was just top 10 individuals that were not included on the master listing, but were included in the trips detail from CareRide, calculated fees, making sure the fees that were charged were correct. Any individuals that took more than 5 trips in a given day. We didn't have many. We had a small handful with 6 and a couple with 7 trips in one day, so we scrutinized that a bit further. And then we also tested mobility status in test 4. Didn't have any issues noteworthy to discuss in 1 through 3, but in number 4 we did. So just the overall summary on the mobility status. We generated a top 10 list of individuals that were designated as either ambulatory or ambulatory with walker. So these are those individuals that, according to the eligibility documentation maintained internally by PSTA, they were denoted as ambulatory, yet they were taking wheelchair trips. And this is noteworthy because wheelchair trips are more expensive than ambulatory trips. So our recommendation here is just to evaluate that further, because we did have a significant number of those, and our recommendation just have a more clearly defined structure and rules surrounding the whole wheelchair versus ambulatory program overall. And so we'll be taking a closer look at that as maybe a project going forward stemming from these audit results. Next, just real quick financial statement overview. We did have a new GASB standard that was adopted, 75. This is on other post-employment benefits. PSTA has always been reporting an OPEB liability. It was just under a different set of rules under GASB 45. Now it's GASB 75. Not a whole lot of excitement in this. In fact, the numbers really aren't too dramatically different. We did have a restatement from 2016 to 17, since the authority presents comparative financial statements, but $200-something isn't much. When the authority adopted the pension GASB 68, that was much more significant, where the PSTA now hung a big pension liability on its books for employees' participation FRS. This is OPEB, and it's not a whole lot different in terms of financial magnitude from GASB 45 to GASB 75, but just want to bring it to your attention. Also, were there any huge significant variances from last year to this year in any revenues and expenses? Really not a whole lot. Property taxes did increase due to increase in property values. We had some state grant monies that increased from last year to this year. That was mostly due to the TD grant, and then also a service enhancement program that had 4 months of activity in FY17, but 12 months in 18. And then we had capital grants and other related revenues. This is a lot of those purchase of tires purchase of buses that's funded by grants. And so that's very cyclical. Some years there's more bus purchases, some years there's less. So that's why it went from 13 million last year down to 3 million this year. And then on the expense side, not a whole lot of variance out of this. Operations had about 2.3 million increase, mostly due to increase in bus operator salaries and benefits. Purchase transportation, we did have some increase in that DART program that we were just talking about. So increase in those costs relating to the DART program that PSTA pays to Care Ride, as well as services provided by Jolly Trolley. So that did increase by almost $2 million from last year. And then administration and finance, we had some just overall increases in wage and fringe benefits, some computer software costs, and also some consulting services. That was a one-time project for the 2018 community bus plan update. That was like a $400-something thousand hit to the P&L in 18 that didn't recur in 17. So that was part of the factor for that increase in administration and finance. Lastly, just some future transition plans. Just want to make you all aware and be fully transparent. I'm going through some career changes of my own, where I'll be doing more focus in my career on consulting and outsourcing services to local governments, to my clients. So some of the special project work we're talking about for DART program, that'll avail me to spend some more time on kind of special consulting project work and spend less time in those traditional audit services. So that's why I brought my colleague Lance Schmidt, who's already met management, has been a little integrated into both the audit team and with the management team. And he's going to be taking over more of those specific financial statement audit duties. I'm going to still maintain overall engagement responsibility. So you're still going to see plenty of me, like it or not. And then also be still taking on that NTD, agreed upon procedures, audit work, and I'll be overseeing that as well specifically. But Lance and I will be kind of tag teaming this audit for next year. Just wanted to bring him here so you can see him, so it's not a complete surprise when you see him next year, and I'll just maybe bring him up just to maybe just say a couple words.
Thank you, Andrew, for the introduction. Board, it's a pleasure to be here today, and I have had the chance, as Andrew mentioned, to kind of meet some members of management, spend a little time with Debbie and her team, and certainly, we're definitely excited about working with PSTA more. Here at CLA, we like to say that what we like to do is create opportunities. That's both for our people and for our clients. And so what we're, by the kind of the transition plans we're talking about, we're doing that both for Andrew and the folks that are working with him, but then also for our clients as well, and doing more than just providing your standard typical tax and audit services, but really trying to add some value and provide those other services. So with that, I know you've heard a lot from the auditors today, but I do want to just say it is a pleasure to meet you guys, and I look forward to working with PSTA more in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lance. I think that's said. That's all we have in our presentation. I'll just take any questions if you all have them.
Board members, questions of the audit? Comments? Well, you're awfully quiet this morning.
Well,
All right, Commissioner Gerard.
I'm just trying to figure out how somebody took 7 DART trips in one day.
Good question. So the way we addressed that, we brought that to management's attention. It was conceivable if the drop-off location was the same as the pickup location. So you go to the drugstore, and then K-Ride picks you up from the drugstore, then to take you to wherever, and then from that location to the next. The one that was, I guess, 6 or 7, we did see a discrepancy between drop-off location and pickup. Management actually, an individual within PSTA actually called those 2 individuals that we found, that we identified, and attempted to verify. So the good news on that there was nothing that was completely unreasonable, like 64 trips in one day, which could either be a mistake in the invoicing or potential fraud in how the vendor is invoicing PSTA. So we didn't see any instances of clear abuse, but we did try to follow up on some of those that were, yeah, this person is busy, likes to get out of the house, clearly, but wasn't completely unreasonable, and we did verify through phone calls.
Good question, Commissioner. Thank you, Andrew. Who do I have next? Next is Commissioner Cox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner Gerard, I could explain that there are some individuals that are, and they're mostly ambulatory individuals, that may go, for example, to Walgreens, and then go to Target, and then go to Publix, and all in one day. There is a 45-minute lag between each trip, though. The car doesn't just wait for them and go the next. And it's no different than a bus passenger can do the same thing. If they have a day pass, they can ride all day. It does cost that individual, though, $4.50 each time, so it's not, totally inexpensive to do that. And it's rarely infrequent that does happen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, I just really wanted to say thank you for looking at this DART program. It's obviously an area that's exploding in use within PSTA, and I think it's an area that we have to just keep a close eye on. You found a few things, I think, for our staff to really tighten up on and kind of merge 2 different databases, I guess, to make sure they're talking. I thought Commissioner Cox had a couple of good suggestions, simple ones to perhaps identify the name lists by a number.
Yep.
A unique idea, instead of having 2 different names that really are the same person that somehow don't get matched, but a number would actually match. So I thought there were some good ideas in our finance committee, so I really appreciate those efforts. The other thing, just a real quick comment maybe on any trends that you've seen on our overtime here at PSTA. Is it upward, downward, about the same? Or maybe somebody else can.
Sure. I can speak to your first comment, actually, because after our finance committee meeting, we did have some subsequent meetings. And yes, those unique unique individual identifier numbers is available, is communicated between PSTA and K-Ride. So those numbers could and should be included in those trips listing reports that's provided by the third party. And so there's going to be an effort to try to get them to report that as well. So it'll be easier going forward to do that comparison. As far as the overtime, I haven't done an exhaustive analysis of overtime, but I'll invite our fearless CFO to come up and give her 2 cents.
She is fearless, too. Good description.
Small but mighty. Actually, we have seen overtime increase, and part of that is due to the fact that we have challenges at times filling our positions for the bus operators. So we do fill it with overtime. That's something we're addressing. And we have been very successful with the work that we've been doing with HR in running classes almost continuously to bring new operators on board. So we actually got to a point where this February we were probably we had 2 operators over what we had anticipated, but we know that'll shift because we constantly have people who are retiring or leaving out of our organization. So it's something that Brad has us look at constantly, is the overtime factor.
Is it a common problem or common issue, I guess?
It is. Finding people who are willing to either obtain a CDL or have a CDL is a real challenge that is out there for all of the transit industry.
And so if we were fully staffed, then there would be a number that would be more ideal as far as overtime goes.
Right.
And so if maybe you could send us some info, just what that would be and where we are now, so we can kind of see what that.
We're constantly trying to find that sweet spot, as we call it.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to have a handle on that. So thank you. Appreciate
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Next in the queue is Commissioner Rice and then Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and I also appreciate your scrutiny into the pending items with the TD program, because of course the DART contract is our largest contract at PSTA, so it's always so important to have a set of fresh eyes. And the other items were relatively minor, but it just speaks to the importance of why it's important to go through the auditing process, because you all have fresh eyes that can catch these things. You bring it to the board and the staff, and it allows us to be aware of issues and make necessary changes. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rice. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman Long. I just noticed that one of the 3 significant deficiencies included verification of all disadvantages, eligibility. Do you have any statistical data on that? I mean, how many did you find?
Oh, sure.
10, 15, 5,000?
That's covered in the actual finding itself. It was a sample of 40, a statistically valid sample of 40, of which I believe 8 did not have. 8 out of the 40 didn't contain the.
So your statistical data is telling us that 20% of our verified disadvantaged riders are riding and are not eligible?
Not necessarily not eligible, just not the documentation, all the required documentation was not able to be provided. That doesn't necessarily translate to them being ineligible, but it does present a heightened risk if you don't maintain that documentation that you could have ineligible riders. So our recommendation ultimately is to make sure you're maintaining that proper level of eligibility documentation for 100% of your riders.
And Brad, do we have somebody that's specifically responsible for making sure that doesn't happen?
We do. We do have a whole staff that I pressed the button. You have to again. That oversees the Transportation Disadvantage Program. It's pretty complicated because there's a number of human service agencies all throughout Pinellas County that take people in, low-income people into their doors, and they have the application, and they process the application, and they have agreements with PSTA to maintain the files. Not all, but some of the files that were missing were not here at PSTA. They were at these other places. You know, and people turn over and different things happen, I don't know. So we have a whole new action plan in place to make sure that this issue is resolved, because Andrew's right, it's required by the state that we keep these records, so we need to keep 100% of them. So we've got a whole new plan of reporting on a regular basis to make sure that we have copies of all these eligibility files here at PSTA.
I think, as other board members have mentioned in the past, we probably need to do something about the system, maybe with a numbers system or something like that, so that when the bus driver sees a card that a person is eligible to ride, or a DART driver sees a card that a person is eligible to drive, we can verify it's a legitimate issued card.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bennett, for your comments and your questions. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments today on the audit? So, Alan, I would just like to share that given the size and complexity of our budget and the many contracts that we have, I find it quite remarkable that there weren't some really serious recommendations that you were making to us today, and I think it sends a very positive message with regard to the strength and the expertise of our financial team led by Debbie Leos. And so, as chair of this organization and a board member for many years, I am very grateful. The public should be very happy with this news. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, so moving on now. Oh.
Action to accept the audit.
Oh, please forgive me. I'm ahead of myself here. So now that we have heard the audit, the questions have been answered, comments received. May I have a motion, please,
Make
to
a motion
accept?
to accept the audit?
Thank you. And a second? Thank you very much. So would you please open the voting card? Are we missing? I'm sorry? Oh, all right. Well, the motion passed unanimously, so thank you very much, everyone. Okay. So yesterday evening, I spoke with Brad about his meeting at the county courthouse with our new county administrator, Barry Burton, and Mr. Blanton, and who is usually here at our meetings, but I don't see him. Is he?
Sarah's here.
Oh, I didn't see her. Oh, there you are. Sorry about that. So I think it would be very important for all of us to hear the results of that meeting and where we are, since the county commission as well as PSTA and T-BARTA's in that mix, and Forward Pinellas are all working really, really hard to digest and to get all the information that we can with regard to solutions going forward for transportation funding in this county. And so, Brad, with that said, could you summarize your meeting, please, and then maybe introduce Joe and Debbie to talk, well, Bob and Debbie to talk further, sorry, Bob, about the issue.
Right, so, thank you. So we have two informational items that are sort of coupled. First, Bob Lasher is going to come up here and kind of update you on the schedule for the next month on public opportunities to comment about the proposed service adjustments. And then Debbie is going to give a presentation about some of the financial issues that PSTA sees moving forward. As the chair mentioned, and I think as Commissioner Eggers mentioned in his Forward Pinellas report, the new Barry Burton and Witt and I have had a number of meetings now, and we had one yesterday to talk about how we can all work together, really in follow-up to the January work transportation funding workshop we had all at Seminole St. Pete College. And it's really been a great relationship that we've established. The three of us, I think, the best it's probably ever been. Yesterday, Witt did a really great job of presenting a detailed sort of plan for priority corridors in Pinellas County on where transit investment would be warranted for increased service all across the county. And this was something that came out at that January workshop, I think, talking about where, if we had additional funding, where would we want to invest that funding? And Barry's sort of focus has been on making sure it's a comprehensive review, that it is not just a transportation plan, but it takes into account the county and our city's efforts with affordable housing and workforce development activities, so people can afford to live somewhere in Pinellas County and then get the training they need to get a job to support their family. And then they can get to and from those locations. So all of it kind of works together. So it's really kind of I think the first time that all that has come together so well. So that was a lot of the discussion, but of course, as you as PSTA board members know, we don't have that new funding to support additional service. We're trying just to come up with funding to maintain what we've got. And so then the second half of the meeting was me talking about basically the presentation you're about to see from Debbie about the need for some short-term funding just to maintain our services, so we don't have to go through with these fairly significant service reductions that we're talking about. And I'm pleased to say that the county administrator was very, very positive about wanting to work with PSTA and committed to me that he would work with us on finding a short-term solution while looking ahead to the long-term plans as well. He offered to get some county staff to work with us on the short-term solution. I have meetings scheduled with the 3 PSTA county commissioners, Commissioner Seal and Peters and Commissioner Welch, to talk to them about it. And obviously, I know he meets with all the county commissioners as well. So I'm optimistic that we will be able to find a short-term solution. We will be able to avoid some or hopefully maybe even all of the service cuts that we're communicating about. But I think the conversation needs to continue. I think we do need to hear from the public. We've heard very nicely and eloquently from Ms. Shaw on a couple of occasions, but Bob's going to tell you about the 2 opportunities we have next month for public comment.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, good morning, everyone. This is just a quick update of something we brought you a couple of months ago in January. We did outline the recommendations to deal with this $1.7 million projected deficit. It involves about 6 routes being cut all or in part. Some of them will be covered by some other routes. Now, these are in your packet. You can see the routes specified. I do want to point out that along with these routes, when you're cutting the 22, if you're looking at the 58, the connectors, that also involves cuts with the DART service, because the DART service, the service for people with disabilities, demand response, operates 3/4 of a mile out from the fixed routes. So if these go away, you're also looking at DART. You're going to be having some deficiencies. No DART in Safety Harbor, parts of Palm Harbor, Northwest Tarpon Springs, for the most part, the east of 4th Street North, outside that 3/4 mile limit. So they are pretty significant. And Brad mentioned these are significant proposals for cuts. It's the double-edged sword of being super efficient. When you have one of the lowest operating costs per hour in the country, when you have a $1.7 million projected deficit, that's a lot of service. So that's what we're looking at. Our 2 opportunities for the public to weigh in. We've got the public hearing coming up on April 10th. It's a Wednesday, 6 in the evening, because that's where we get most of our requests. People want to be able to come after work, so it'll be in this room, as well as at your board meeting in April, which will be on the 24th. Again, they will be able to weigh in. And this gives us a chance for the people who come in on April 10th or who've been contacting us through email for us to gather all of those comments, as well as a petition that we've also had from Ms. Shaw, and get those to you before the meeting, because at that meeting on the 24th, you'll be asked to make a decision as to how we move forward with these cuts. Thank you. The 10th is 6 p.m., and it will last as long as it needs to last. So everybody gets there for 3 minutes.
Bob, if
Yes,
I
ma'am.
could ask you, what is the vehicle by which we are getting that information out to the public about these service cuts?
As many as we can. We have notices on the buses, at the terminals, press releases, social media. The website. Sorry,
Bob,
I forget the
writing
website.
the specific routes or out there on the routes that are.
Yeah, we've been doing surveys. We have our outreach team as well, working any way we can. We are letting people know about it.
Do you have a press release that you prepared with regard to the public hearings?
I believe Whitney's working on that now. I don't know if it's gone out yet.
If you will get that to me,
Yes.
I will see if we can get it out through our county communications department. That would be another way to promote it as well.
They usually, and we send them to the local PIO network from all the cities and ask them to push it out on their different websites, social media, et cetera.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Commissioner, where are you here? Okay, there you go.
Okay, sorry. Bob, thank you for your update. Do we have, in addition to fielding questions and concerns from affected riders, do we also have data to back up the rationale for our changes in service so that they are aware of why this particular route is being affected?
Yes, it's mostly ridership based. I mean, these are not unproductive routes, but they have a lower productivity, and that's where you have to start.
And do we also have methodology for riders to use a substitute route or another methodology to get where they're going?
We do, yes, we have some of these routes, we'll be moving others to pick up the heavier ridden portions of the routes. We also work with them to use the Direct Connect program. We will do outreach anywhere we can to help people find another way to get around, but there are still going to be some who will really have no options.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Barclay. Commissioner Gerard?
Yeah, I think that, you know, we had a speaker earlier who suggested that we survey those businesses along Route 58. Have we ever done that?
Yes, ma'am.
And
Please refrain from speaking out.
When's the last time we did that?
Probably in 2017, when we were doing the first look at the 58, we were reaching out to some of the major employers that we know we had ridership to along 118th, some of the major call centers. And one of the reasons we have some odd gaps in the 58 is because their shift work does not match normal 9 to 5 hours. Starts earlier and ends later. We were kind of surprised to see that. So that's why the 58 has some unusual scheduling along that route.
There are other businesses there other than call centers, I guess.
Yes, those. Well, we did it also based on, we were looking at the stops along the route and who's getting on and off and where were we seeing the most riderships. So we wanted to go and engage them, find out. And we also know that they have their big ride or trip generators, so we wanted to involve them as well. I cannot say we hit every single business along the route.
Well, I think it's worth looking into. I mean, if they have to wait an hour and a half for a bus when they get off work, they're not going to use it.
Right.
I wouldn't stand in the sun for an hour and a half waiting for a bus to go home. So I think I would look into that. That is, even in our own bus plan, the area that's most likely to grow in jobs.
Yes.
And secondly,
I don't
Bob,
get
I
cutting
think-
that route rather than re-examining and figuring out how we can capture more of those workers.
I think it might be important to revisit that a little bit, because
Sure.
the last time we did it was 2017. We're halfway almost through 2019, and there might be some new businesses along that corridor as well. So just, put that on your
Absolutely.
list of things many list of things to do. Anyone else? Comment? No? All right.
All right, thank you.
Brad?
So now let me introduce Debbie. Debbie's going to kind of go through a brief PowerPoint, really to try to address two questions or two issues that that we heard at the last board meeting during our discussions. And it's really a follow-up to sort of what I am describing as a due diligence process, where since that January transportation funding workshop, I committed to Whit and to Barry and to you that we would look at all different options, every possible option, saving money, looking at the non-member jurisdictions that don't participate in the ad valorem that I presented last month. How we came up with the service adjustments, presented that last month, and then, so the two things that Debbie's gonna present are, one, I hope to respond to questions raised at the last meeting about whether or not a stopgap funding solution is necessary, even if it doesn't solve the problem in perpetuity. Short-term, cut to the chase, it is. It's important, because we don't want to necessarily have to reduce and eliminate all this service. And then number two is to highlight the real challenge we have when we are forced to use our built-up reserve funds to support ongoing operations.
Thank you, Brad. That was a very comprehensive introduction. So what I'm going to do is dive right into the charts, right into the meat of the matter here. And on the chart that you see here, the bars represent our projected operating costs starting with fiscal 19, going all the way out to fiscal 25. The colors represent our funding sources. The green is what we can afford to operate with our current funding sources. So that's a good thing. The yellow is not as good because that means we are using our reserves to help operations. And the red represents service cuts. Of course, that is bad. So we've got a sort of like the red light, yellow light, green light here. One of the things that I wanted to show is on this chart in fiscal 19, as we all know, we have a $1.7 million deficit that we're facing this year that we're using our operating reserves for. As Bob mentioned, we're coming to the board next month to talk about the $800,000 worth of service cuts that we would be starting within a couple months. And that is reflected in here. When we make the service cuts, that helps lower our expenses in the years going forward. As you can see in the chart, it's not enough to meet our needs, so we start dipping into the yellow piece, our reserves, to help our operations, and that keeps increasing. Matter of fact, we run out of reserves, and those reserves were intended for capital investments in 2022. Now, you've heard today from several of our customers how difficult the $800,000 cut is, which is worth 1% of our operating expenses today. When we look out and we run out of money in 2022, we'll be looking at $11 million worth of service cuts in 2023 to be able to balance the budget. That is more than 10 times what we're talking about today. So this is why it's very important when we have no operating assistance, we will not be able to have money to match our grants because we've been very successful getting low-no grants. We won't be able to do such things as have a match for FDOT funding to bring people from downtown St. Pete to the airport or from the airport to our #1 beach in the country. There's a lot of things that I know you all wish we could do, but we cannot do. We will also not have funding available after 2022 for our already programmed capital expenditures. So this is why it's very important. And the use of our reserves, and you've heard me talk about this quite a bit, for what I call one-time expenditures in operations is not the best solution. I like to take our reserves, put it into capital, which we enjoy for many years to come. Now in this chart, we take a look at a new funding source, which is in blue. That's the infusion of $5 million of operating assistance starting in 2020. And with that, you can see it really helps us going forward. And we still need to use some of our reserves to get us out there a longer period of time. But the important piece is that with the infusion of $5 million of a new operating assistance source, we will not have to make cuts this year and will not have to make cuts until 2024. It really extends it out and gives us a time period in which to be very thoughtful in determining long-term solutions. The point of this chart is that stopgap funding is a good thing. It provides a lot of benefits. It provides the benefits of at least providing the service we have today with no cuts going out. It allows us to have money available out of our capital reserves for what they were intended. Capital, which is a longer-term investment, and keeping our investments in a state of good repair. So the decisions we make today, the strategic decisions we make today, have long-term positive impacts when we start adding additional funding sources. And the reason we talk about the funding piece of it so much now is that because we have done many innovative things and many savings ideas and revenue-generating ideas over the years. I know this board is well aware of them because you've been part of that decision-making process. Not everybody in the community understands what we have accomplished, but by doing what we have done to save money or to increase revenue on our own, we have had 5 years of fiscal stability. And now we've just gotten to the point where we need to start looking outside of our area because the customers are our most important, if you will, asset. And you have heard from everybody, we don't want service cuts. And here we are sitting with a healthy reserve because of our fiscal responsibility. Now, even though I don't like the idea of using our reserves for operations, I think it is the right thing to do for the people of Pinellas County, along with additional operating assistance, so that we have a stopgap measure that will get us out for the longer term. And we have had the demonstrated need for additional money. We know from our surveys the customers want more frequency. They want more evenings. They want more weekends. We want more regional service. And our goal is not to be the lowest funded transit agency in the country. I think we can all agree with that. We are already the lowest cost, which is good, but not the lowest funded. So we want to be able to go beyond where we are today. We want to be able to grow our service. We want to be able to meet our capital needs. And to do that, we need more funding and more funding partners. And with that, I'll entertain any questions and go back to the different charts if you'd like me to.
Commissioner Barkley?
Debbie, thank you for your report. Very well done. If you go to slide 2, can you identify in dollar amounts the yellow use of reserves, what the amounts are in those yellow bands?
Yes, in fiscal 19, we're using about 1.5 million instead of the 1.7 because we're assuming the reduction of service. That $800,000 annual reduction equates out to around $264,000 in this fiscal year, assuming we move forward. And then the other years, we're using reserves of about 1.2 million, 4 million, 9 million going out in addition to our capital.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Cox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have but one question. Perhaps you could answer it for me too. The LGOT, which is under control by the county commission, if there were like a 5-cent addition to that, what would that generate for this agency? The local gas option tax?
For the city or the county?
For the county. For the bus service, actually.
You're talking about the local option gas tax?
Yeah.
The estimate on the total amount of funding that would generate per year is about $17 million. Although Barry and Whit and I were having a discussion about verifying that, maybe getting an updated number on that. The existing local gas tax, not any additional, is governed by an interlocal agreement between the county and the cities, and the cities share in the revenue for their road-only needs. 60-40. 60% stays with the county for their roads, and 40% goes to all the different cities. This is just one of the ideas. If a 5-cent local option, the remaining 5 cents were approved by the county, that would generate 17 million. 60% of that, or the county share, would be about 10 million. The county's road fund is also showing a deficit in the future years, so 50-50 is about 5 million. Okay. That's a hypothetical. The county administrator acknowledged that idea. Whit had some other ideas. Maybe there's another source. So this is just a steady, it's more illustrating what $5 million a year could do.
Anyone else have any questions on this portion of the meeting? Debbie, I have a clarification, if you would.
Certainly.
Did you say that little yellow piece there for 2019, we are taking 1.5 million out of reserves?
Correct. And let me just go back to the first chart. Our anticipation in the budget that we passed for this year is the use of about $1.7 million worth of our reserves without making any cuts.
Without making any cuts,
without
1.7?
1.7 million, because that is our deficit for this year. So with the cuts, that brings it down to about the 1.4 million, 1.5 million dollars that we would take out of reserves this year. In the chart that you see before you right now, that assumes basically the $1.7 million with no service cuts. So by having $5 million going forward, we won't make any cuts today. We will not make any cuts until we anticipate 2024. And if you see in the chart here, the red piece is about $2.9 million in 2024, which is a lot better than the $11 million we're projecting today in 2023.
So, given that we have the reserves and given the comments that I heard you make in your presentation, it seems to me that we might want to go forward with no cuts for this year, take what we need out of reserves, knowing that between now and when we come back next year in our budget cycle, we will be working on a full-bore funding solution. I don't know, how does the rest of the board feel about that thought? Comments, Commissioner Rice?
Madam Chair, I like hearing that because my concern is that by cutting service, we're already a nimble agency, and by cutting service, it's just not where we want to go. It just makes our system more inefficient. It contributes even more to the stigma of transit being being a low-quality experience. And I think all of us to a person have greater hopes for the type of service that PSTA provides to our community. But I would ask that if we made that decision, I'd want to hear more of a commitment from our county commissioners and other partners that there is a serious recognition that we do need this stopgap funding. I don't want it to be this perennial agenda item discussion that keeps going on as if there's no urgency about the issue. And I'm not suggesting that you characterized it that way, but we've had this discussion many, many times, and I think it's urgent, and I think we need to see our partners help respond to our needs with a sense of urgency too.
I hear your concerns, Commissioner Rice. I think those of us that have been working on transportation solutions for this county, not only the county but the entire region, share the same thought process. And if there's one thing I am not about, it's an exercise in futility. I think that the momentum, please correct me if any of my board members feel that I'm off the reservation with these comments, Commissioner Eggers. But didn't I say that well? I thought I did that really well. Thank you. I think the momentum is really with us and on the side of the fact that our citizens are also feeling that we have reached a no return place with congestion on our highways. I hear more and more complaints from everyone. And there is a finite place beyond which even our citizens are going to start saying, hey, come on, we need stronger leadership. We need to make decisions here. We need to get going. If we're going to be competitive and we're going to stay vibrant, not only in our region, our county, and our state, then we cannot keep on doing the same things we've always done. We have new leadership in county government at the top, and that's where it starts, and he's committed as well, I feel. So I look forward to the comments from my colleagues. Commissioner Eggers.
Even without hitting the thank you. And I certainly don't want to say anything about any reservation or you being off the reservation. But look, I think the biggest thing we've got to talk about, and probably in the context of that, is that we've reached out to our business community, and the business community has said we need more transit. We need more availability of transit for young people that are here, then aren't leaving to go somewhere else, as a component of their daily life. And to attract other talent here, younger talent, that's an important component. So when you have government and business working together, there's probably something good in that. I mean, you know, cynical as people want to be about government, when they see business community saying, hey, we have an issue. So that's the first thing I'd say. And there's also that additional component of senior independence. And we have a wave of seniors that are aging right here, well, across our country, but right here as well, and getting them out. We had some discussion about that earlier, and folks needing to get out of their homes to have independence. There's a lot of factors in place that say that doing something for transit is important, and so I think we're all kind of going down that path and that road, and then we also think about that generational conversation. So if we're going to get to a point for our kids or grandkids or their kids, we're going to have to take those smaller steps now to get there. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we're exploring all options, whether it's a piece of the gas tax, whether it's a piece of the TDC funding, whether it's the 5 or 6 or 7 communities that don't participate. There's a lot of different options. And one thing that, we've talked about cutting bus routes equates to a certain amount of dollars. And I am sure there's a number somewhere, and I don't want to talk about this too much, but when you're talking about cuts, it would seem to me that the bus route cutting would be the last thing we would do. So I know that we're pretty efficient as a group compared to our peers. But at the end of the day, I can't worry about our peers. I got to figure out how we keep this current level of service going. So we need to think about all avenues of cutting costs here at PSTA as an alternative, along with all the other things that we're looking at. But I do agree with you, Madam Chair, that there does seem to be some momentum and some, I guess, shared vision, about trying to make sure that we can bridge that gap before we find a permanent solution. But we have to provide alternatives for the whole county, because if at some point we decide we want to go talk about some other permanent source of funding, you better be having something for a quarter of the county that does vote for any kind of referendum. And I think that's something that cutting service is not a healthy thing, is what I'm saying, and we need to try to avert that. So
we are really making progress here this morning. Okay, Commissioner Gerard.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with you. I think we passed a budget last fall that included this minor use of reserves. I think we need to stick with that and not be looking at service reductions right now. I understand that that's a way of putting pressure on the county government to come up with money again. We are looking at all the different ways that we can do that. And I can assure you there is a commitment to that. It's not just our responsibility. Again, there are other sources that can be looked at and apparently are not being looked at. I think one of the things that we need to do is take a look at the DART program and figure out why the costs are escalating so much. I think we have some ideas here. I think the county, I can't speak for all 7 of my fellow commissioners, or 6 of my fellow commissioners. But I think there is a commitment to keep us from having to cut service, but there has to be a long-term solution. This is a black hole. The needs of transportation in this county are way bigger than the county government can handle. We have a lot of other things to do. The other thing, though, I'd like to say, though, I think the other speaker we had this morning was talking about free service, and here we're providing free service to baseball games, and we're providing free service to spring break. That's kind of an insult to the people that are looking at their routes being cut. And I understand it's a way to get people to use the bus, but it's a slap in the face to those people that are looking at their route to get back and forth to work to be cut. Why are we offering free service when they're going to cut my livelihood? So I just think that's something to look at.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I think it's important that everyone weigh in. This is a really significant discussion that we're having here. Commissioner Schulman.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
I had a question. On one of your slides, you had an $11 million a service reduction number. And then you also said that when we run out of our reserves, we won't be able to have matching funds for state or federal grants. Is that on top of the 11 million, or is that included in that 11 million?
If you take a look on the chart, if they can put it back up on the screens here, in 2022 we run out of our reserves in its entirety. On many of the discretionary grants, what they require is a match, and you have to prove the match. You actually have to attest to the fact that we've got the money in the bank, if you will, or it's coming from some other local source. So without that match, we're not able to leverage additional federal funds or state funds to be able to do some of the projects, or whether it's a Lono bus, whether it's a bus facility project, trips between, like I said, service trips that we could do. So we miss out on those opportunities.
And so I guess what I'm getting at is that's
So
on
we've-
top of the $11 million service reduction is the potential loss of matching capital.
Right, and
matching
it's
service enhancements.
right, and we
from other
actually end up in this chart. We have some projects already programmed with our reserves, capital reserves. Those will have to go away. In the $5 million additional, we don't have to eliminate the programmed projects. We are projects right now that are capital funded or reserve funded.
Okay, and I guess
so that really helps us.
And I understand that. Let me focus more on the Lono grant where we have matching for a bus purchase. Is that reflected in the $11 million decrease?
Our current grants, by the time we get out there, we'll have the buses purchased. It's not an issue. We've made that commitment. So those commitments of our dollars today for the grants we've just been awarded are already taken into consideration.
But anticipating the
The new
availability of
grants,
future grants as they
it takes it away.
We will not, so that's an additional loss to this community on top of a potential service reduction down the road. Okay, and the other question, between the two slides in 2020, there's a 84 million in the first slide, and then with $5 million of operating assistance, it goes to 87.
We knew you would ask that question. In the 84 million, we're already taking into consideration the $800,000 worth of cuts and some other items in here. We are also in here, because we're not eliminating service and we're getting an infusion of $5 million in 2020, we're able to actually put a little bit of money away into the reserves for the next 2 years to allow us to then move forward and use less of our reserves in this chart than we otherwise would have. That's what allows us to maintain our capital program. So essentially, we're saying we think it's very worth it to take some of our reserves, put it into operations with the addition of money, and not compromise our state of good repair. Over here, we're putting it, we put some money into capital, which we've already got obligated, and then all of it goes towards operation and our capital program falls off.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Just one final comment.
One more.
Yep, not a question. Just wanted to say I really appreciate the fact that as an informational item, it's important that we see this, the public sees it, the county commission sees it, and so I'm very pleased that we're going through all of these different steps to let the public aware of what we're facing.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fenger, you've been sitting here on this board for a very long time. Would you like to weigh in on this incredibly important decision or issue that we're talking about today?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would agree with most of what has been said up here, which is that I've received public input on not cutting service routes, and I think that would be a better direction for us to go, as most of the input that I received via phone and emails, and that there are people that are relying on it for their, as we've already discussed, for their jobs, and as we heard up here today as well, that it is their livelihood, and they don't have, individuals who don't have cars, and it's something that impacts not only in transit, but also it's impacting their livelihood in getting better jobs, in moving up for education, whatever they're using it for. Is if we take that away, we're also not helping in other manners. So I would like to not see routes
Excellent.
reduced. So
Well
thank
said.
you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Albritton.
Well, I just wanted to say, you know, I've listened to a lot of transportation meetings and going back several months, and I haven't been on this board very long, but I mean, we do have something that we really do need to be talking about all the different ways that we could get funded. I don't like cutting service. I've been talking about adding service, you know, since Greenlight, and we do a great job. PSTA, there's no fat to cut. I mean, you guys are down, you're very lean. I think we just need to be talking about ways and getting the public understanding that, you know, coming up soon we're going to be running out of money, and we need to find ways that we can, you know, we can get more money to keep services going. So that's very important to me. We've already have our budget for this year. If we've got using some of the reserves, I'm on for that. But I think we really need to have some. We really need to get down into discussing how we're going to fill that gap in the years coming up. And I think we've had some good talks about how we should do it, and maybe in a progression. I know Hillsborough just did the sales tax addition. I don't think we got to jump into that, but right away. But we need to get the public on board with what we're doing. So,
Thank you very much, Commissioner Albritton. And since you are here representing the city of Clearwater, I think it might be important to share with everyone that those free bus rides that we've heard quite a bit about this morning are not really free, because your city is paying for those bus rides in Clearwater.
that's correct.
Absolutely. I just wanted everybody to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner Driscoll.
Thank you. And thanks to all who have provided input so far. As a relatively new board member, it really helps me a lot to hear your insight from your experience on this. So I'll just give you my perspective. I think anytime we have to reduce services, it really goes against what we're all working so hard for. And I would much rather put my energy into looking to see how we can increase revenues. I think it's time to get a little more creative about that. There might be some ways that we can pull in extra money that we haven't tried before. So I'm hoping that perhaps I can be helpful in that respect. It also troubles me that we're looking at cutbacks while we have several communities in Pinellas County that receive all of the benefits of having PSTA service, and yet they don't pay in. They're not paying their fair share. Maybe I need to learn more as to how that's happening, but I'm not at peace with it right now. And I can't help but think about this as we are short on money. We've got people who are benefiting from this by having, folks from other cities who work in their communities, relying on the bus to get there, which is part of their economic development. It's very important to their cities' local economies. And we are providing that benefit and getting absolutely nothing in return. There's just a question of fairness there that I think should be ironed out. And so I look forward to learning more about why we're in that position with some of these communities and how we might be able to make some changes in that regard. Thank you.
Commissioner Driscoll, for your very important comments. And Brad, I would like to ask you to put on your list of things to do an opportunity when you have your one-on-one with Commissioner Driscoll to give her the history about those 5 cities and why they are not part of the countywide ad valorem tax issue, but also to share that many of those cities that we're talking about do pay into PSTA. They just do it in a different way on a formula that they work out with our administration. So moving forward, Mr. Bennett, I'm sure you have some comments to make. Please, there you go. Oh, okay.
Well, I certainly agree with that. You know, there's almost $5 million right there. If you could look at the numbers, which is what our deficit might be. And even though we say that some of those cities have their own little formula, it's about 1/10 of what my city has. Yeah. So their formula is lacking. And we need to, as a board, step up and say, we want that done.
And I'm sure that that will be part of our discussions going forward. So thank you. Commissioner Cox.
I do mirror Councilwoman Gina Driscoll's comments there, being from St. Petersburg as well, and seeing a very large community on the beach that really utilizes this service. And it's called St. Pete Beach. And with the trade winds and all the special routes we have for that and so on and so forth, and I do believe there should be a buy-in, an absolute buy-in.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Commissioner Barkley, you have any comments?
Nope, I would just echo.
Please hit your button.
Oh, thanks, sorry. The one thing that I would say is that everyone is alluding to is that when we cut service, we lose ridership, and many of the formulas that we get from federal and state entities are based on ridership. And the second thing is that when we lose ridership, we lose the habit-forming process of people to use the public transportation that's available as opposed to getting in their cars and adding to congestion, pollution, and other negative things to our environment. Part of what we do as a public entity is provide for the ability to minimize negative environmental impacts. We use electric buses now. We use electric diesel buses. We've gotten away from use of many diesel buses, and we hope to continue to use diesel buses less in the future. And so we want to avoid losing ridership because we want to get people in the habit of using public transportation instead of hopping in their cars. So as we go through the process of making these really important decisions, we need to consider the fact that we, as a public entity, have an obligation to protect our environment and to help educate our population base, not just our riders, but our population base, so that they will consider public transportation instead of a personal vehicle. So I strongly encourage everyone to put their thinking caps on. I strongly encourage all of those who have the ability to impact state and federal funding sources and other private funding sources to make sure that we, if at all possible, can avoid the negative impact on our environment, which would be involved in cutting service.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Barkley. And just a last couple of comments from me on this issue. Please, each of you, really get yourself familiar with this budget. As board members on this board, we have to own this budget and the service that we're providing to our citizens. Going forward, we will have several funding workshops on transportation solutions. And those of us that were at the first one that we had a month or two ago, you know it was a robust and very, I found it to be incredibly positive because everyone had an opportunity to weigh in and share what the issue really was. Now that we know all of that, and some of us have known it for a very long time, we are moving slowly but surely to the solution piece. And I do believe, since this is a conversation that's been going on not only in our county but our region for over 50 years, we are poised today further along to a solution than we ever have been. So while the momentum is moving that way, please, let's all come to the table with some very thoughtful and new and creative ways in which we can fix this for our citizens once and for all. And not only for our citizens today, but for those little ones that are being born that are going to grow up here. Surely we want them to enjoy the same quality of life that we have all had. So with that said, any more, Debbie, on your piece?
No, ma'am.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, board members, for your participation. Brad, how about an update on other reports or new information?
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. So over the next month, I will do my best to provide additional information. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. I think on April 24th, it's likely we would have a 15-0 vote in favor of not cutting the routes. I hear you. I'm not going to make it that easy on you, though. We're going to have, Debbie and I are going to have to get together and come up with some really strategic position that the board can take about the service, plans, so that it does keep the momentum going as you described, but it also makes sure that we have a we maintain our strong financial position. Just a few other comments. We are having a meeting with our Care Ride, sort of I don't think it'll be the last meeting we have. It's the first of what I think will be a number of meetings with our contractor for DART to reflect on some of the recommendations that the auditor made, and then looked at ways that we can manage that budget. Having the first one this afternoon. We had our annual bus rodeo a couple weeks ago at the beginning of the month, and we had a repeat winner. Nehemiah Guerra was PSTA's bus driver who got the highest points in the obstacle course that is a bus rodeo, and we had our maintenance team competed as well. It was really a fun event this year because it was kind of like a Tampa Bay regional rodeo. We had PSTA, Hart, Sarasota, Manatee, and Pasco County transit systems all here at PSTA together competing. So, and I had a great day judging out there, getting sunburned, judging the people hitting the cones. Maybe next year we'll invite board members to come and be judges for these fine people.
You mean you're not going to invite us to drive?
Maybe not. I don't know.
I was going to say, we don't have enough insurance.
So next, Nehemiah moves on to the state rodeo, which is this coming weekend up in Jacksonville. So we wish him best of luck there. And then if he wins that, then he goes on to the national rodeo. Good news on our Central Avenue Rapid Transit project. It got another medium-high rating from the Federal Transit Administration, which is very positive. When we were in Washington, D.C. talking to FTA, they were very, very positive about the project. Of course, the state has also committed its funding for the project. I was in Tallahassee last week, just very briefly, to wish the state transit director, Ed Coven, farewell. He is retiring. I think he's retiring at the end of this week, and he had a retirement party, and I just wanted to confirm before he left that we still had the $10 million from the FDOT, so that was really my goal. And it was confirmed with the new leader. And last, I'll just note, I'm very proud of, as you know, we work very hard to develop our employees and invest in our stars of the future, and we've got a whole bunch of stars. I think I've told you before, Trish was with us. Trish Collins, our HR director, was in Washington with us because she is in the current class of Leadership APTA, and she was a great asset to our group. And I know she's, she's the HR director, so she's kind of an expert in all of these organizational development things, so she's kind of like rocking the Leadership APTA class. Her classmates are all looking to her as, like the Yoda of all this stuff. But I'm also very happy, Bonnie Epstein, and I'll see her, but she was just selected into APTA's Emerging Leaders Program, which is really another coveted position, and she's been doing a great thing. She was up there on the stage with me talking about our innovative programs, which is what she manages. So I'm very proud of our staff and what they're accomplishing. That concludes my report.
Well, we're proud of them too, because they all make us look really, really good. So thank you, everybody. Any other business, future business, Brad?
No.
No? No. Any further board comments before we, yes, Commissioner Eggers.
Well, I like some of the comments that have been made, really appreciate some of the conversation we're having. We seem to be having it at our board, different boards, quite often and frequently, and I think somebody made a comment that we need to make sure we continue this conversation with our residents. I know we're going to have just in a North County conversation on transportation, hopefully in May, to talk about roads and buses and any kind of transit that's going to be needed going forward, kind of in the long term. But when you think about, we have 1% to 2%, somewhere in there, of our residents use transit. I mean, that's the number that I've been told, and until I'm told something differently, that's the number I'm going to go with. So not many people are using it. So cutting services now even further, I think, to Commissioner Barkley's comment about, it kind of takes us away from the mission of getting more and more people on the system. So, but I think it's really going to be important for us to continue developing that short-term, mid-term, long-term transit plan, because at some point people are going to come looking. So what do you have for us? Why should we invest in this system over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And we better have some good answers and some comprehensive answers, not only for within Pinellas County, but how we plan on connecting to north, south, east, and not west. But I think that's going to be an important piece of all of this. So we got to get our ducks in a row. I know MPO's working closely to try to come up with some of those corridors and areas where people will be living, and therefore what are the connecting corridors and that kind of thing. So I still think we have a lot of work to do as we move forward with that. We're looking short-term funding, but we've got to keep working hard, reaching out to our residents about this issue, but also figuring out what that vision really looks like. What are we going to use their money for? And I think they want to know those creative new uses and creative new routes and whatever that is. And so that's all I would have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Eggers. And to your point, when you peel all the layers away from the onion, what we're really talking about here is changing the culture in our county and our region about how people move from point A to point Z. And you do that by making it cost efficient and effective, that that you can get from point A to point B efficiently and on time. So those two things, I think, are the key to how we get to the solution. Commissioner Albritton?
I think we've had some good discussion here today. I'd like to see us move in a direction of more of a strategy on how we can get funded. It's up to us. It's up to us here to find that out, and not by cutting services. We should be adding service. If you want people to ride the bus more, you need to give them a better schedule.
Thank you.
And, people will get used to doing that and we'll get that 10% ridership up, which is what we should be doing. So I look forward to talking about strategies in the future.
Terrific, thank you very much. Anybody else? Anyone? Well, very good meeting of healthy, robust discussion. And look at that, we're through our agenda, so we are ready to adjourn. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe a little more now.
I just wanted to, I mean, the main thing is people understanding what's
Get in the corner on that now.
Yeah.
Well, great job, thank you.
Plus,
Strategy.
and that's what I
How we
wanted to
could
say out loud.
without going to each individual ones, countywide.
We'll have the countywide
Yes.
referendum
Yeah.
to include everybody.
Yes.
And then they have to vote.
It's gonna be like a little social media thing.
That's
As long as there's no icing involved. Okay.
I did.
We had a plan.
For you to repost it.
right. I won't have to use my umbrella on the way out. I hear you. I know what you mean. I had these two parts to show how to put that.
And what's the challenge? I do it for a week, a day, or?
Say hi.
Oh, okay.
Right, I mean, of all.
Okay.
Having getting rid of the dogs. Yeah, I mean, it's like, okay, so what about, now on the other hand, you look at it and say, look, you're gonna make a lot of money off dogs.
Okay,
They
cool.
cost us a lot. You don't have to go to food, there's a lot of stuff. Then you're looking at turn on those.
Yeah, no, I get it. Okay, great.
I see the general sentiment, but I just think that's the kind of conversation. It's painful, but we have to.
I realize I go past your house all the time. Because when I come through because I'm at 316 21st Avenue Northeast, so I cut through like on Locust and then go up 9th Avenue, and I walk that way, I drive that way, I bike that way. Your house, sometimes.
Or I think it's, and I don't probably don't want to have it, but first, somewhere.
Yeah, I drive through the neighborhood all the
That's
time.
why honestly, I love to, morning.
Yeah, I live at,
Is your house like the teal color?
That's the best.
Yellow? Okay.
Really have a conversation as opposed to bouncing from soliloquy to that's what we do.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah. Cool.
there's some nice ones.
you go down and like,
We're quoted in
6:30.
Was it?
Yeah.
Charlie walking.
But I mean,
bus stop, which is on the Locust.
You can do that here.
I know.
I mean,
Like all the
kids.
kids.
So I try to, whether Commissioner Long believes that I try to keep my.
They all stand on corners, just looking at their phone. Head buried in their phone.
I'm sitting here, right? I'm not invisible. You can see me.
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Good.
That worked out then.
Good to see you.
Dr. Ed.
Proud soccer mom would have little PSTA stickers you can give to everybody as they walk up and congratulate. Like, here, put this on your bus.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
So when do you think, is that happening later today?
Yeah.
Okay, not that you have to stay, you could do it tomorrow. Be ready.
But,
That's good for some part.
oh,
She may, they're not on the same page, but she can She has a way of talking to him that,
Dr. Carlson and his buddies, Tom Rast and Barbara Hazleton and Sharon Calvert and his two other friends that wear the Citizens for Lane Loss t-shirts were at the St. Peter's Commission last night. Yeah.
is it Carlson? Okay, yeah.
Jungle
Terrace.
Neighborhood Association.
Affiliated.
I don't know if he still is currently, but he has been. Okay.
I'm gonna have
Yeah, no, I know he did.
With the big lettering on there,
He has like a red t-shirt.
Well, I think.
I have a funny quick story, but I went to this Harmony Eco Spa right next to the Hollander, and I was talking to the woman, and she offers these like anger management classes that I wanted to get my brother involved with, because she's like, it teaches people how to kind of deal with anger and it's not like a bunch of therapy and talking about your childhood. And I was like, oh my God, my brother needs that. So I started research, and I clicked on to find out who the practitioners were that informed the practice. And you know whose freaking face showed up? Ed Carlson. I'm like, okay, well, not doing this.
Was this an example of someone who needs to go? Or?
No, he's the person that designed the anger management program.
Well, those
and
who
I'm like,
are most
okay.
angry probably know the best.
Right,
Needs to be done, right?
But I guess he's some type of sociologist or something, I don't know, but.
I mean, they do it when we're on the
Anyway.
Well, I want to